All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday morning, April the 24th, 2025, and thankful to be feeling a little bit better. I've had a rough week health-wise, and but I am here and doing well. And my Rivkala is running the slides this morning, and so she's going to be kind of adjusting to everything. And so if the slides are a little bit behind, just give her a second when we transition into things. But good morning, everybody. We are so this week, because I had gotten sick, and I was if I go to the emergency room, I'm in desperate pain because I hate the emergency room. And but everything's fine, and I'm good. I'm just dealing with some congestion as well. So we haven't yet been able this week to do anything in the Torah portions. We've had one day with no manna. We had 2 days of Hebrews. And so we're going to do Torah portions today, and we're going to do Torah portions tomorrow. So we're going to do live daily manna today and live Torah portion daily manna tomorrow. And today we're going to be looking at Leviticus chapter 9. And the title of today's daily manna is The Eighth Day, when worship turns to wonder. And so just want to remind everyone, just take a moment, if you're able, to hit like, and you can wait till the end of the video if you want to wait to like it, but just hit like. And if you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe, and share our posts. Of course, we haven't had our daily bites every day because of what I've been dealing with, but we'll get back on everything in rhythm very quickly. All right. Well, again, the title of today's daily manna is The Eighth Day, when worship turns to wonder. We're picking back up in Leviticus. We're Leviticus 9. And so this parsha is like it basically brings us to what is now the climax of a very long narrative that began in Exodus 25. With the command to construct in Exodus 25, we're going to construct the Mikdash, construct the sanctuary. So the name of this parsha is Shemini, which means the eighth, because it describes what begins following the 7 days. Remember the 7 days of ordination, or the 7 days of filling, of fullness, that had been described at the end of our previous portion. Now, the previous portion is Parashat Tzav, which was 2 weeks ago, because you'll remember you have Parashat Tzav followed by Passover week, and so we've had a little bit of a pause since we were last in Leviticus. And so our previous portion at the end of Leviticus 8, it ended like this, with Moses instructing Aaron and his sons in this way. Leviticus 8, beginning in verse 33. Just want to check with Rivkala. Are we good? You good? Okay, Leviticus 8, verse 33. You're not to go out from the entrance of the tent of meeting, from the Ohel Moed. It's the tent of the appointment. We're having an appointment. You're going to meet with me. You're not to leave that, to go forth from there. The word is tetse. You will go forth. The word of the Lord will go forth, tetse, from Jerusalem. It says, you will not go forth from the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the days of your ordination of your fullness are filled. For he will be filling your hands for 7 days. Right. So this is again, it's often called the where there's sacrifices concerning ordination, but it's a sacrifice for the filling, for the fullness. The word that's ordination here is fullness. He said, what has been done this day, Adonai has commanded to be done in order to make atonement for you. You're to stay at the entrance of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep Adonai's commands so that you do not die, for so I have been commanded. Thus Aaron and his sons did all the things that Adonai commanded through Moses. And that brings us to the eighth day, to Shemini. So the 7 days of ordination, of filling, have concluded, and now on the eighth day begins the sacrificial system, as it were, begins the service of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, begins the beginning of the ministry of the Levitical priesthood. Up to this point, The sacrifices had been offered by Moses. But now Aaron and his sons will step into what they have been filled to do, called to do, what they have been assigned to do, chosen and dedicated for it. And so in his capacity as the leader of the people, it says Moses, he summoned, he called Aaron. Again, verse Leviticus 9:1. And it was, or now it happened, Bayom Hashmini, on the day, the eighth one, on the eighth day, that Moses, he called Aaron, his sons, and the elders of Israel. So the eighth day is the first day of a new week. The eighth day signals a new beginning. And indeed, this is a new beginning. This is the inauguration of the Levitical priesthood, of the Aaronic, of Aaron as high priest. And this new beginning, this new priesthood, in which, we have talked about how the making of the tabernacle, some weeks ago, how there are parallels, the language of the making of the tabernacle, of the place where God's presence would dwell in our midst, is akin to sort of the creation of the earth or the creation of the universe. There are similarities there. And so now what this points us now toward is having made this place where God dwells in our midst, and God has then instructed these who will operate as priests. This is a new beginning, that now they begin to function in their calling. In the beginning, when all was waste and void, right? When it was, and God created the universe. Day by day, the world unfolded, right? First, there were the domains. There was the light and the dark, the upper and the lower waters, the sea and the dry land. And then the Lord filled those domains. He filled with the sun and the moon and the stars, and then the fish and the birds, and then finally on the land animals, culminating in the creation of humanity. And then came Shabbat, the seventh day. So the eighth day became a new beginning then. It's a day when the Lord had now entrusted humanity to rule the dominion over his creation. So we see in Genesis 1:28, look back in Genesis 1:28, says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, be fruitful and become many, be numerous, fill the land and conquer it, or subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, the flying creatures of the sky, and over every animal that crawls on the land. Now, when you read that language there, by the time we're done with this portion, which is happening on the eighth day, which is Leviticus 9, 10, and 11, when we come to the end of Leviticus 11, there's very similar language. Leviticus 11 is going to give us all of the different distinctions between the clean and the unclean, the things that we can eat and the things that we're not to eat. And so it ends, and so you have very similar language of dominion being given over humanity to rule over the fish of the sea, the flying creatures of the sky, and every animal that teems or crawls or moves upon the land. And so again, we see that language at the end of Leviticus 11, similar language. This is the Torah, Leviticus 11:46. This is the Torah, the instruction concerning or of the animal, the bird, and every living creature that moves in the water, and every creature that creeps or moves or teems upon the earth, to make a distinction between the clean and the unclean, and between the living thing that may be eaten and the living thing that may not be eaten. When you go through Leviticus 11, that language it's where it goes through the animals, then it goes through the fish, and then it goes through the flying things and the birds, and then it goes through things like bugs, and deals with that, and what is clean and unclean. And so here you see this parallel between, now you've been given dominion to make distinction here in terms of how these things will be handled, and there's order that's there. And so there are parallels between the creation account and between now the inauguration of the priesthood in this new beginning. But before we get to that part, before we get to the dealing with the animals and so forth. There is another parallel that occurs between the creation account, or the Genesis account, as it were, and this portion, and it's the tragic parallel in this 8th day, because in the Genesis account, that which began with such glory and hope and optimism descended into tragedy and disappointment as humanity fell into deception and then rebellion. When what Adam did was rebellion, because he knew he had been directly instructed, and so to have disobeyed was, regardless of what was said, was rebellion, and he was held accountable to that against the one command, against the single command of the Lord. And in this Torah portion, this 8th day, which is this incredible, joyous occasion in which the glory of the Lord descends, what should have remained a joyous occasion all the way through, turns into tragedy when, in Leviticus chapter 10, 2 of Aaron's sons die after having brought what is called strange fire, unauthorized fire. It uses the word fire uses the word geru. It's strange. It's foreign. It's not what the Lord had instructed. And so specifically what that involved, and we're going to look at that more closely tomorrow. But today we're going to focus on the beginning, on this new beginning, the new beginning of this Levitical priesthood that starts in a similar fashion to the new beginning of humanity in the garden, right? And just as there was hope offered in the garden, right, all that we see in the Torah, though our ancestors fell so quickly, they fell so quickly in the garden, and then our ancestors here in the desert, as soon as they had to receive the commands of the Lord in Exodus 20, and how quickly they within weeks, we have the golden calf episode in Exodus 32, and now you have the inauguration of the priesthood. Right? So everything is created, and then humanity fails. God meets us, sets us free, gives us the commands. We make a golden calf. And now he meets us. We have the inauguration of the Mikdash, of the beginning of the Levitical priesthood. And on day 1, 2 of the sons of Aaron, those who would have followed him as the high priest, these, having encountered the glory of the Lord, having been given very clear instructions, rebel against the Lord. And so time after time, there's this fall. And what it continues to point us toward ultimately is the hope of the king and the priest who will not fail, who will not fall, who has not and will not fall, God himself in our midst. And so we have the 8 days. The 8th day is the inauguration of the tabernacle. And so that becomes the pattern, really. The 8 days celebrating the inauguration of the tabernacle here really becomes a pattern or a paradigm for other inaugurations of the temple. We have Solomon's the inauguration of Solomon's temple, which he dismissed them after the 8 days. He said the people could go, but they continued to celebrate, and it was a longer celebration. Same thing with when the temple was being rebuilt and was dedicated, and with Ezra and Nehemiah after the exile. You have an 8-day celebration that became a 16-day celebration, but this 8th day, the 8th day becomes, it is the idea of forever, the 7 days of a wholeness, and then this day forward forever, and this is the moving forward of where you will be, and so that it ultimately points to that. Leviticus 9:1. Now it happened on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron, his sons, and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take a calf from the herd for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and offer them before Adonai. Now, what I've tried to do here is, and I may miss on occasion, but anywhere where we see the word to draw near, approach, where in Hebrew it's the word karev, which is to approach, to draw near, that's often not translated that way in English. I try to point that out. Now, it is here. To offer them before Adonai in verse 2 is to draw and to approach the presence of the Lord. Where it says before Adonai, it says lifnei, to the face of Adonai, to the presence of Adonai, to approach the presence of Adonai. So, Moses. Now, a couple of things that are just to point out. Whenever you see the word for like sin offering, the word is just he offered the sin, like it's chata or chatat, and it doesn't say chatat sin offering, but that's what it is. It's he's offered to approach for his sin, and then the burnt offering is simply the olah, the whole offering or the burnt offering, and then it says both of them are to be without blemish, and that word is a very familiar word. It's the root word is tamim. So when we talk about integrity in Hebrew, there's a simplicity that it is through and through the same thing. Tamim. It can mean simple. On Passover, when you go through the 4 sons, right, and the youngest one, or the one that is simple. The word is tam. He's just, there's an integrity. There's no, it's like this is an Israelite with no guile. There's a purity to him. So that isn't translated here as unblemished, pure, through and through. There's integrity to these 2 offerings. So Moses takes Aaron and his sons to one side in the presence of the leaders of Israel and instructs them to gather the materials that are needed for the different offerings that Aaron is to present that day. And the first thing that he's to do is offer a burnt offering for himself. I'm not sure why the TLV left this out, because it doesn't just say in verse 1 and verse 2, take a calf from the herd. It says, chach lacha. It says, take for yourself a calf from the herd for a sin offering. So the high priest, Aaron here, needed first to deal with his own sin in the presence of the Lord. And we know that Aaron is certainly not guiltless or sinless. And what's notable here is that Aaron is instructed, here it says, to offer a bull calf for his own sin offering. The word in Hebrew here is egel. So I've put the word in there so you can see it, egel. This is what he's to offer for his own sin offering. And what's interesting, what's notable, is this is the only time in Leviticus that this particular animal, egel, is stipulated as the offering for the high priest, for Aaron. And really, at all, not just for Aaron. We do see when Aaron, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest is to first offer atonement for himself. And we see that in Leviticus 16:6. It says, then Aaron is to offer the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and his house. And that word in Hebrew is par. So here, he is to offer a egel, a calf. It's a word that we have seen associated with Aaron before. We see it repeatedly stated throughout Exodus 32. Look at Exodus 32:4. He received from their hand and made a molten egel, a molten calf, fashioned with a chiseling tool. And then they said, this is your God, Israel, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. So we only see this word egel in the Torah the many times it's listed in Exodus 32 concerning the golden calf. Then we see it here in Leviticus 9:2 and Leviticus 9:3. And then a little bit later in Leviticus 9:8 here, and these are in reference to the offerings of the people and the offering of Aaron. in this particular occasion, on this inaugural occasion of the ministry of the Levitical priesthood. We don't see it again anywhere in the Torah, anywhere, until you get to Deuteronomy 9 in verses 16 and 21, when it's simply pointing back to the golden calf episode. So this specific sacrifice, this specific sin offering is specific. This calf is not something that becomes a standard offering or sacrifice throughout Leviticus, throughout the Torah. It is specific to being related to what happened in Exodus 32 with the golden calf. And there's something that is notable, I guess, here about the recognizing, the approaching the Lord, and the taking responsibility, the confession of our sin, but the acknowledging of it in specificity before the Lord. That this is not simply general, but there is a specificity here that points back to the sin. And so, I know that it's one thing even when we come and we confess before the Lord, and we, as a little kid, I would just say, or I was a young man, I'd say, "Dear Lord, please forgive me for all my sins." But there is something about, in repentance, there's within, as you go further in Torah and in restitution and making things right, and repentance, and often it's, the word can have to do with the shalom, making things whole, that, like what you see in the New Covenant when Zacchaeus repented, he paid back with interest, as it were. So it wasn't simply repentance of his lips, but repentance displayed in action that really was involved. And so that kind of heart condition, where we come before the Lord with a specific acknowledgement, there's something about when you come before the Lord and you name the sin, not to walk in the shame of it, but to recognize the beauty of the fact that the Lord, to remember what we did with this calf after all the Lord had done. And yet here we are today, as he has given us another opportunity, welcoming us into his presence. And so he says the first thing you got to do is you come with this sin offering. And again, it is this very specific thing. And he was to offer both the calf and the ram. They were to both be tamim, without blemish, to be with integrity. And it says, and draw near to the presence of the Lord. Kariv, come to the presence, the face of the Lord. And then following his own sin offering, he's to offer then the four major offerings. You have the chatat, the sin offering. You have the olah, the burnt offering. You have the fellowship, or the shalom, shlamim offerings, or the making whole offerings. And then the mincha, which is the grain offering, is the bread. And he's to offer those four offerings on behalf of the people. And you see here even underlying principles of worship on display. That as you approach the Lord, to come in confession, to come dealing with the sin issue, right? And so we bring that sin offering. And then when the proper atonement has been made, the worshiper then surrenders his life and his labor, as it were, to God, with the wholeness of his offering, coming with the burnt offering and the wholeness of the fellowship offerings, the shalom offerings. And then finally, he brings the grain offering to enjoy fellowship with the Lord in the context of communion. So verse 3 says, you're to begin to speak to the children of Israel, saying, so now these are the offerings concerning the people. So now he's made atonement for himself. And he says, now you're to speak to the Bnei Israel, saying, take a male goat for a sin offering, along with a calf and a lamb, both yearlings, sons of a year, it says, without blemish, blameless, of integrity, for a burnt offering, for olah, plus a bull and a ram for shalom, shalamim, shalom offerings, to sacrifice before Adonai. And that word sacrifice there, it is to slaughter, as it were, to kill. So the word... And just so you know, the word zavach here, meaning to slaughter, is the root word of altar, mizbeach, right? Mizbeach comes from zabach, which is, mizbeach is from the slaughtering. So at the altar, sorry to yell in here, at the altar, something dies. Something dies at the altar. And by its very definition, there is a death that occurs. And I would just make the application that for all of us, when we come before the Lord and we acknowledge our sin and we come with confession, and we come with confession and specificity, that there is a death to self. If any man would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me, Yeshua says. There is a death to self. That at the altar, it's not simply going to say, Lord, yes, lift up my sin, and I want to be in full fellowship with you. But for that to happen, something has to die, right? And we lay our lives at the altar knowing that he raises us to new life, and that we see that. I mean, throughout the New Covenant scriptures. Don't you know that you who have been immersed, you have been immersed into death and then raised up to new life? And that's coming before him. And so we see here in this day of inauguration of the ministry of the tabernacle, there are 7 offerings of living things. So you have a wholeness. You have, for Aaron, there was the calf from the herd without blemish for a sin offering. The second one, and I think I got them on the screen, Riv, you can run through them. We have a ram without blemish for an olah, for a burnt offering. And then we have a male goat for a sin offering, chatat. We have a year-old calf without blemish for a burnt offering for an olah. We have a year-old lamb without blemish for an olah, burnt offering. And then we have a bull for fellowship or shalom offerings. And we have a ram for fellowship or shalom offerings. So you have 7 offerings of living things, capped off then by the 8th, by a grain offering mixed with oil. And so that's something very relational about that. And anytime you bring a grain offering before the Lord, he's already said it's to be without, there's to be no matzah, no yeast in it, and there's to be no honey in it, no sweetening of it, in that artificial sweetening, as it were, no making it puffier than it is. But here mixed with oil, right? So there's a richness to it that's related to the work of the Spirit in our lives. And so the order here follows patterns that we're familiar with already. There's a purification, followed by a gift of a whole offering, a burnt offering, then the fellowship offering, followed by the grain offering. And then, but here's the big reveal. All of this is happening. And we come to the end of verse 4. And this is ultimately what it's all about. Look again at verse 4. It says, "For today Adonai appears to you." Today he will make himself known to you, to be seen to you. And so they've seen the glory of the Lord at a distance on the mountain, but today he's going to be in your midst, he says. Verse 5, so they brought what Moses commanded before the tent of meeting. And the entire congregation, Karav, they drew near and stood before Adonai. Again, even when you see before Adonai, it's in the presence of Adonai. It says to the face of Adonai. Moses said, verse 6, "This is what Adonai commanded that you shall do, or so that the glory of Adonai may appear to you." Right? The glory, kavod Adonai. So again, the people had previously witnessed the glory of the Lord, the kavod Adonai. But at that point, it was in thunder and lightning and in thick cloud and smoke, and it had the sound of a trumpet blast in Exodus 19. God had revealed himself on that occasion with awesome majesty, and the people had been warned to keep their distance so that, that he doesn't break out against them in their unconsecrated state. And they naturally were trembling. But now his glory was going to appear in their midst, not from a distant mountaintop, but in their midst. And the phrase kavod Adonai it's not an unfamiliar phrase. It's a phrase mentioned throughout the scriptures, but actually this is its only mention in the book of Leviticus. It's the only time the phrase is used here. The glory of the Lord this is all for the glory of the Lord to be in your way. And the word for glory is the word kavod, which is weight, his weightiness. He is worthy. He's not to be thought of lightly, dismissed, or dealt with casually. Even in our, it speaks of Abraham and in the Torah and says he was a friend of God. And even in as he draws us near, and there is a tenderness, like, I think of just the relationship I had with my father, who my father was tender and he was loving to me. But my father carried an authority as well. There was a presence. There was an authority about him that took nothing away from his love for me. And he was a friend to me, but he was my father. He was my father. I remember my dad was a prison chaplain, and I can remember being at the prison with him as a little boy. And there would be guys that would come in his office, and they loved him. They loved him. They would come to me and they'd be like, your dad is like a dad to me, a father to me. But he would be so much, sometimes harsh to me with them. And I'd be like, Dad, like the way he'd be like, come on, get it. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. Because they'd be in there trying to manipulate or whatever. And he saw through it and he called them on it. And he dealt with them the way they needed to be dealt with. And they loved him and knew that he loved them. And because of where I was with my father, I didn't normally have to experience that kind of harshness. But even when the harshness would come, it was from his love. And no matter what, we come before the Lord with knowing he is tender and gracious and overflowing in love. But he is holy. He is holy, and there's none like him. And there's a gravity. There's a gravity about him. A weightiness, the glory of the Lord that is displayed in his character, that is not to be dealt with loosely or lightly or haphazardly. And we'll see later in the chapter that the people respond in verse 24 to God's glory falling on their faces before him, but also with a joyful shout. And so there's joy and awe in the same place. And so in preparation for the arrival of the glory of the Lord, Aaron begins to walk out in obedience the instructions the Lord has given. And I'm going to move quickly through the remaining verses, so I'm sorry this is going long. If his glory is to be revealed, though, his people have to be in a state of readiness to receive it. So there's a preparation being undertaken according to what God himself has planned and instructed. Verse 7, Moses said to Aaron, Karav, draw near to the Mizbeach, to the altar, the place of death, as it were, the place of the slaughter, and make your sin offering and your burnt offering, your olah, and make a covering on behalf of yourself. Make atonement on behalf of yourself and on behalf of the people. It says, then draw near with the drawing near, as it were. Approach Karav with the korban, or do the korban, the approaching, present the offering for the people, and make atonement for them as Adonai commanded. Verse 8, so Aaron drew near Karav to the altar, and he slaughtered the calf of the sin offering, which was on behalf of himself, which is for him. The sons of Aaron then presented the blood. They drew near with the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and dabbed it onto the horns of the altar. And he poured out the blood at the base of the altar. But the fat, the kidneys, and the cover from the liver of the sin offering he burned up as smoke on the altar, as Adonai had commanded Moses. The flesh and the hide he burned in a fire outside the camp. So the sin offerings had been given. Now came the giving of the burnt offerings, the whole offerings. These are not sin offerings, right? These are an offering of wholeness in approaching the Lord. The sin offering has been now done. It's been dealt with. So now comes the burnt offering. Aaron slaughtered the olah, the burnt offering. Then his sons presented the blood to him, and he splashed it around the altar. They handed the burnt offering to him, piece by piece, along with the head, and he burned them up as smoke on the altar. He washed the karev, the innards, and the legs, and he offered them up in smoke upon the burnt offering of an altar. So every part you say, Lord, all of me. Now this comes on my behalf. This is a picture of all of me. You know, Romans chapter 12 says, now present your lives as a living sacrifice, right? Holy unto the Lord, fully unto the Lord. This is your reasonable act of service. Well, so now you have this image of a whole burnt offering that's piece by piece, the entirety of me, and the inside of me, the inside of what is offered on my behalf, washed, right? The karev, the coming near, the approaching, the insides are washed. That's not insignificant. While there are practical occasions to the washing of the innards and whatnot, there's a picture of a place here of what the Lord is really concerned about is the inside. The outside, that's going to be burned outside the camp. But my head, my heart, my innards, everything that I am brought before him, holy unto him, cleansed, and then arising as a sweet fragrance. May it be a sweet, sweet smell, a sweet savor in your nostrils, O Lord. Verse 15, then he karav with the karban. He presented the people's gift. He drew near with the karban, that which is the sacrifice or the approaching of the people. He took the goat of the sin offering, which was for the people, slaughtered it, and offered it for the sin, just like the first one. He presented the burnt offering, and he offered it. And again, he kariv. He drew near with the burnt offering and offered it according to the decree. And the word for decree there is mishpat, having to do according to justice, what it was just. Here it's the right thing, the just thing to bring all of me before you. Verse 17, then Aaron drew near with the grain offering, filling his hand with some of it, and burning it up as smoke on the altar alongside the burnt offering of the morning. He also slaughtered the bull and the ram as the sacrifice of shalamim, of fellowship offerings for the people. And then his sons brought him the blood, which he splashed around the altar, as well as the fat from the bull and the ram, the fat tail and the layer over the innards, along with the kidneys and the covering of the liver. They put the fat upon the breasts, and he burned it upon the altar. But the breast and the right thigh, Aaron waved for a wave offering before Adonai as Moses had commanded. And there's just this picture of worship, of taking all that I am and the strongest part of me, the meatiest part of me, as it were, the most flavorful part, right? The breast, the thigh, that which is my strength, that which is my core, and saying, I'm all yours, right? It's all before you. I worship before you. And now Aaron then turns and exercises his priestly privilege by then speaking God's blessing over or upon the people. And we're not told here what the words are that Aaron used on this occasion. There's no reason to assume that they're necessarily different from the blessing that God provided for his use. And that's what Jewish tradition holds, that he would have said, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord turn his face, lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Right? That this is the prayer of the people. Verse 22, then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and he blessed them. And then descending or stepping down from the presenting of the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the fellowship offerings. And then he stepped down. Verse 23, Moses and Aaron then entered or went into the tent of meeting. When they came back out and blessed the people, the glory of Adonai, kavod Adonai, appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the presence of Adonai. So it came forth. Tetzeh, says fire, tetzeh, esh, mil fene, which is from the face of Adonai. Fire proceeded, came forth from the presence, from the face of Adonai, and consumed or devoured, consumed, it's the word for consumed or to eat even, could devour the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. The word for fat is typically, it's just the plural for the word milk. The milks, the fats upon the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted, and this is a joyful shout. This is the word kanan for a joyful shout. They shouted and fell on their faces. Right? So having followed God's instructions, now his glory appears to the people. And fire goes forth from his presence. from the face of the altar, from the face of Adonai, and consumes the burnt offerings. Right? The meat and the grain they had been slowly burning on the altar were now completely, supernaturally consumed. Right? This was an unmistakable mark of God's acceptance of these offerings, of his acceptance of the people. Rather, he doesn't consume them. He consumes what they have offered him graciously. Right? And this fire from the Lord would be seen at other times in Israel's history, is when Samson is announced in Judges 13, when David sacrificed an offering to appease God's anger in 1 Chronicles 21, when Solomon's temple was dedicated in 2 Chronicles 7, when Elijah dealt with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18. Each time God sent fire from heaven to confirm his presence in a visible and majestic way, and so to transform an ordinary situation into something infused by his power. When the people saw the fire, they responded, as we mentioned earlier. They shouted for joy and fell down. Right? There's worship, there's awe, there's joy and awe in the same place. They had met with the Lord, and God is still a consuming fire. The writer of Hebrews tells us, Hebrews 12:28 says, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude. Through this we may offer worship in a manner pleasing to God with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." And unfortunately, in the verses that will follow, which we'll look at tomorrow, the very same language, the exact same language, that fire came forth from the face of the Lord, from the presence of the Lord, is used, but now in a way that shocks our eighth day, having gone from this joyous shout to Aaron's silence and stillness as his sons approach the Lord in an unauthorized, unholy manner. They are consumed. And the eighth day turns into that tragedy. And so there's much for us to look at with that tomorrow. But the desire of the Lord is to be in our midst, and for us to be in his glory, and for there to be a joy and an awe in his presence. And I know I've gone long today. We will continue with Leviticus 10 and maybe touch on 11 tomorrow. And then, of course, Shabbat on Saturday. All right. Well, hey, it's so good. Thanks, everyone, for your prayers. Man, my Tuesday night. Was it Tuesday night? I felt like, no, Monday night. I wanted to die. The pain. I was in such pain. 6 hours, 7 hours, just nonstop. It was a reaction to some medication that doctor had me on, and rough. And but graciously the Lord alleviated my pain, and I'm good. So, all right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.